think they should just like keep the flea market off. I honestly think the game is better off without it. The game would have a longer early wipe progression period without it. Gear would matter more. Really going into your raids to look for items, I think, is one of the most crucial things that's been missing from this game. The whole point of this game is to escape Tarkov. If you die in your raid, you've lost. You lost the game. So how are you guys enjoying the no found in raid hideout items and no flea market? I guess no found in raid hideout items doesn't really matter right now because, I mean, there's no flea market to begin with at the moment. But how are you guys finding it? For those of you that are playing. It's great, no longer money runs, now matters when you loot. Yeah, I agree. I always said the biggest problem with early wipe progression was the fact that people could get incredibly rich off of items that everybody needs. Because at the start of a wipe,
Happy New Year,
everybody needs nuts, bolts, tape, you know, soap, AWOLs, whatever, you know, all the tier 1 hideout items. And when you're an experienced player and you know that everybody in the entire game needs these things and you're able to get the flea market first, usually day 1 of the wipe, because that's what happens with most seasoned players, day 1 they'll get flea market. Then what do? They go and farm nuts, bolts, tape, things that literally spawn everywhere on every raid, almost every container. They're the most common items in the game. And then they become fucking incredibly rich in a very short amount of time, where when everybody needs all those hideout items, if you're able to capitalize on that, you will make a ridiculous amount of money. Like so much money that it will literally set you good for the rest of the wipe. Like, you will not really need to money farm outside of that really early stage. And so I'm really glad they made that change, because I always did feel like it was a pretty big flaw in the progression that you as a player, if you were able to get flea market first, which was really a very small minority of players in my opinion, especially like first couple days. If you're one of those players, you're just able to get excessively rich so easy, not really having to risk much or look for anything or find anything necessarily valuable. It just so happens to be the start of the wipe, and everybody in the entire player base needs the same fucking thing. And if you're one of those people who isn't really that good and can't really progress that quick, tough luck. You're going to miss out on that opportunity to make a ridiculous amount of money. And the flea market economy has always gone the same every wipe. Everything always kind of has its rise and fall. But I just don't think that's going to happen anymore, because now that, you know, hideout items are found in raid, you know, they're not going to change much on the flea market throughout the wipe. So, for example, car batteries would go up to like 300k, right? Because it's a heavy item. You need quite a lot of them for the hideout. And, you know, it's like something that people would pay a lot of money for, because people know they're kind of a bitch to get out of a raid. You know, it's a car battery, right? However, those car batteries will go from like 300, almost 400k at a time, depending on the demand, and then they'll fucking plummet all the way down to like 20 or 30k after a couple weeks. And then, therefore, car batteries are no longer really worth looting or bringing out of raid whatsoever. You know what I mean? It's just not even worth the fucking weight or the size. So I'm honestly really glad to see those changes. And having no flea market first couple weeks is cool. And I honestly just think they should just like keep the flea market off. Just keep it off, dude. I honestly think the game is better off without it. The game would have a longer early wipe progression period without it. Gear would matter more. Really going into your raids to look for items, I think, is one of the most crucial things that's been missing from this game. The whole point of this game is to escape Tarkov. If you die in your raid, you've lost. You lost the game. Therefore, you shouldn't really make any progression if you lost, because that's just how a lot of games should work. If you lose, you lose. If you win, you win. And so now that the game is a lot more about actually surviving, I think that's pretty cool. You actually have to go into your raid to look for stuff that you need. And I think that's really cool. I feel like that's how the game should be. You should be rewarded for winning the game. You should be rewarded for surviving. And if you can't survive, that's just a skill issue. I don't know what to tell you. A lot of the grinders already have max traders. Oh, I'm sure. And that's like another thing. The flea market changes are really for the money, right? We're talking specifically about money farmers, okay? Obviously, everybody has max level traders. I've always felt traders are also incredibly overpowered. I think traders offer too many things to the players. I've always felt that way as well. You know, they've just been very strong for a very long time. You know, they have too much available to them. The trade restock is too consistent. Like, if somebody has like max level traders, guess what? Every trader reset when they're on all fucking day, because most of these grinders are on all day. They buy everything off every reset, resell it on the flea market for a shit ton of money whenever the flea market opens. And then they can consistently stack like the really good ammo, attachments, armor, and weapons from the traders, and just can get that shit on a refresh. And I personally would love to see the traders become much more minimalist, and a lot of the better items are things that you unlock from quests. Same thing with recipes in the hideout. Like, I would like to see a lot of the best items be crafted and creating more dependencies on the hideout. So like certain items that are crafted in the hideout should come nowhere else in the entire game besides the hideout. So in other words, they wouldn't spawn in a raid. You couldn't buy them off the traders or the flea market. It's just like, it's a hideout only thing. And the only other time you'd find that is if you killed a player who had that item in a raid, right? Armo is decent at the start of last year. All ammo is viable, but sweats and streamers cried because they couldn't race to the highest armor and ammo and just tank charge people anymore. I know, but I mean, to be fair, to play on their side a little bit, it is very frustrating bringing in a bunch of good gear and then just getting randomly one-tapped in the chest when you're like facing somebody because of the way the hitboxes work. And, you know, so I would definitely agree. Like, that's a very frustrating thing to do. But I would argue it's more frustrating to spray a guy fucking 20 times center mass and he just turns around and kills you. You know, when in reality, like, armor shouldn't protect you like that in this game because that's not the game that Tarkov is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a hardcore battle simulation game with a very high emphasis on realism. Realism! But, you know, it gave people a fair chance. It made it to where people with good gear couldn't just W key you and like run at you. That's kind of how it is again now, with the exception of the neck hitbox, because people get head throated a lot. There's like a middle ground that could have been made without going to an extreme, and that's what I wish BSG would do a little bit more, is I feel like they kind of listen to the community too much sometimes on certain issues, and it ends up causing a opposite effect. Like I said, like everybody was like, wah, one tap to the thorax, I hate this. Then they go from, wah, people are so tanky, and it's a fucking never-ending cycle. It's just how it goes. It's like you want this fucking change, you got your fucking change, now you realize that change was fucking bad, and now you want something changed again, and it's just like, it's a never-ending fucking cycle, and it's just a waste of fucking time. It's a waste of Battle State's resources when they're so close to being able to finish this game, and they have a limited amount of time to actually work on shit, pressuring them to work on stuff that really shouldn't be changed, at least to the complexity as it should be. Like I said, leave the hitboxes, just fucking increase the thorax and stomach HP 2 times, just double it. Like, problem fucking solved. Would it be a good idea to add a concussion or similar mechanic when hitting in the armor? No, I don't think so, unless you did something where it's like based on ammo type. So it's like if you got shot in the chest by like 545, 556, even 308, hits your plate, that's not going to do fucking anything to you. Whereas if you get shot in the chest with like a slug or like an Ash 12 round, like 12-7, that's going to fuck you up, and that would do like a lot of blunt damage, right? But I would say like having some kind of like extra blunt damage effect to getting shot in the body armor, unnecessary. It would probably just feel shitty at the end of the day. But if it was specific to like mass and caliber, I would see that making sense because it's like big, slow moving projectile with a lot of force. Like that would probably put you on your ass or something. You know what I mean? Some people cry no matter what you know. No, for sure. You're 100%, man. A lot of the games I've been playing lately on stream, like Project Zomboid got updated recently. We've been playing a shit ton of that. And like a lot of the people in even the fucking Zomboid community are bitching their ass off about like random little things. But the difference is about Zomboid compared to EFT, bro, that game has sandbox settings. You can literally go in and tweak anything the way that you want it to be. You're like, oh, I don't like the population of zombies. I want to have more loot. I want to change this. Like you can go and do that. And like people were like bitching at the Indie Stone. It's like, brother in Christ, like just open up the sandbox settings and change it. You're not forced to play it that way. And so it did make me realize like, wow, like a lot of people really do just bitch to bitch and complain, even when they have the power at their fingertips to change it if they wanted it to be different. It's that fucking simple with that game. But not every game also is like that. Not every game has this like amazing native support that allows for, you know, like full customization of the gameplay. The only things that are kind of similar are like, you know, DayZ, but that's because of mods. Like the game natively doesn't really have that high level of configuration that's like, you know, easily accessible through like drop down menus and shit like that. What the hell? Ouch. Like I'm saying, people bitching, but Tarkov got better. I agree, man. I honestly think this update's probably a skippable wipe, but a lot of the fundamental changes are really strong. No flea market first 2 weeks. Found and raid hideout required items. I honestly think that's pretty dope. Those are good changes that will increase the longevity of the early wipe gameplay that everybody seems to love. But whenever something changes that makes it slow down, everybody seems to complain about it.
Clean 7.
You ask anybody who plays Tarkov, when's the best time to play? Start of the wipe. Everybody says the same answer. Start of the wipe. Early wipe's always the most fun time to play. Anything that I think that preserves that early wipe experience makes the game better. Pretty dope unless you're playing on a standard account. That I do feel. I feel like they need to make the Scav Junkbox and a couple of the other early game containers a lot more accessible. Like getting a lunchbox or a Scav Junkbox shouldn't be as hard as it is. I think it should be much, much cheaper. They just need to open up the accessibility for those and not make them so expensive. But yeah, I feel that for sure. Because you guys definitely have to collect a little bit more this wipe. But in my opinion, honestly, again, this is just like a fantasy, I guess. But I wish there were no different editions for Tarkov. I wish everybody played on standard. If everybody played on a standard account and everybody had to upgrade their stash, everybody was always on the same playing field with rep, starting gear, money, I genuinely think Tarkov would be a better game. But obviously, like I said, they can't ever go back on that. Like, that's not anything they could ever do. Unless maybe they had like a season, like 1 year if they want to do like wipe seasons, you know, post 1.0. Where it's like hardcore season, everybody on these servers plays on a standard account, no secured containers, shit like that. But Tarkov would be a much better game in terms of gameplay and progression if everybody played on the same account and everybody had the same starting shit. So there are no different editions. There's none of that other crap. Genuinely, I think the game would be a lot more interesting that way. The way you play the spawns and the whole spawn meta, it's like I spawn in, 25 minutes left. Okay, I kind of know that there's probably still some PMCs here. You know, there's enough time to know that there's still probably a couple lingering. And like I already have information that helps me. Whereas like if I spawned in and, you know, it's like fucking, you know, 15 minutes left, I could probably know, okay, there's not really any PMCs here. If I see one, that's probably not going to happen. And you're already able to get a lot of information just based off the time alone. Again, guys, I don't have a solution. I don't know what it could be. Oh wow. I don't have a solution or anything that I could think of to design like in my head that would make it make sense. But it's just that's the way the game is, and I hope they can change it somehow, because I don't think it's such a simple change as like increasing raid timers or making spawns more random or whatever. I think it's a much more deep-rooted issue that would require kind of a fundamental change to how raids work, if you get what I mean. Like this is how I would do it. Assuming that all of this would work. I'd basically do what the cycle does, okay? So PMCs would continually spawn in your raid, no matter what. Like raids would, like a raid would last for like 12 hours before the server resets, or like however long it would need until the server like actually needs to reset, okay? And so the raid timers would be gone. There would be no raid timer anymore. Instead, there would be events that happen. So for example, the event would be mortar strikes or an artillery, and what they would do is they would specifically target the player and other entities out in the open. Whenever you'd hear basically a big alarm, and it'd be like, wah, whatever, it could be like wee woo from reserve or something, and that's letting you know, hey, get inside of a building, there's about to be mortars. If you're outside, you're gonna get blown the fuck up. And then that would basically cause people to go inside a building, hunker down, and wait for the mortars to end. But what would happen during that period of time is loot would respawn in areas of the map where there are no players. And then after that ends, where areas of the map where there are no players, new PMCs would spawn in those locations somewhere around the map. So as long as, like, you know, there's no other PMCs around Big Red across the river, you could spawn over there, right? So essentially like the cycle. So this way, like, you'd kind of have a constant ebb and flow of people coming in and out of the match. But in order to make sure loot's respawning, you basically have the mortar mechanic where it's like, if you're not inside of a building, like, you will eventually get blown the fuck up. If you're still outside, you're gonna die. Get inside. And that makes people hold still. And then any other parts of the map that don't have any players would respawn loot. The containers would refresh, items, world spawns would refresh in those areas. And then if you're inside, you know, like, oh, okay, I can kind of keep going in my raid and look for stuff, and maybe I can find something. But again, it would have to have a sophisticated spawn system where, like, players that are continually spawning in the raid will never spawn next to another PMC or like a player scav potentially. Like AI scavs are around, whatever. But as long as there's no players in the vicinity, a new player would basically spawn in after that phase. And that is basically how I would imagine raids being way better, way more dynamic, and actually being less predictable. So that way you'd never really know where anybody is. You'd hop in a raid, there would be no raid timer. You wouldn't know where the fuck anybody's at. You wouldn't know what has and hasn't been looted. You just go play your raid. You're lost in the sauce. There could be somebody anywhere. And it would also allow people, if like you wanted to live in the raid and stay in a raid for as long as you wanted to, you're like doing shooterborn, bro, you got 3 hours, bro, I'm gonna be in this raid for 3 hours, assuming you got snacks. You know what I'm saying? I feel like that'd be cool. So that's really the only thing I could think of to kind of create like a proper dynamic like spawn gameplay loop within Tarkov to remove the monotony of like the like I spawn here, I know this guy's here, I know there's 45 minutes in the raid, nobody's looted this type bullshit. You know what I'm saying? But again, like that's I don't know if any of that would ever work. That's just like me saying like assuming all of that happened to work and it worked like perfectly or whatever. You know what I mean? It's basically just what the Cycle did. And I think the Cycle was the only extraction style game that got that gameplay loop right. They got that down so well and it felt really good. Especially it was cool like seeing like the drop ships come down and stuff. That was always really cool. 12-hour RP gas station attendant. Yeah, you just living at gas station. What up, boys? What are your thoughts on aiming dead zones like Red Orchestra? I feel like it would be interesting. It would buff lasers indirectly, but maybe nerf the run and gun gameplay. So, I agree. I have been actually wanting an aiming dead zone in Tarkov for a long time. If you guys don't know what an aiming dead zone is, basically the gun would kind of pivot and not follow the center of your screen. So if I have my laser here, my laser is always in the same point. It's always in the center reference point of the screen constantly, both on the horizontal and vertical axis. So it's like always relatively going to be in the center. So you can, you know, do stuff like this, pop, turn, and shoot, blah, 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 like that. One thing I don't think people really ever talk about in terms of Tarkov's TTK is the stability of weapons and how quickly they come up after sprint. I've always said ergonomics should affect how quickly your weapon comes up after sprint. So if my gun here has like 58 ergo and I run and stop, the gun going down and coming back up should be slower than a gun that has 100 ergo. That would basically make it, if you want to run and gun, stop, turn, and shoot really quickly, you need a gun with high ergo. If you have a long-ass DMR, you have like a big LMG, you're not really going to be able to run and gun, turn and shoot off a dime off your sprints and be like a mobile shooter. You're going to have to really like play a little bit differently because of the weapon type that you have. So it'd usually be assumed if something has really low recoil, it's probably going to have low ergo as well. But if something has like higher ergo, its recoil is not going to be as low. Because recoil has always been the most important stat in the game, and I've always thought it's really fucking stupid. Why is recoil just recoil, and why isn't it split up between vertical and horizontal? That would diversify the attachments so much if different weapon stocks and grips and shit like that affected the vertical differently than the horizontal, because it's just both. Recoil is just recoil that applies both stats. They should separate the two. That would diversify the weapon loadouts a absolute shit ton. It would make it much more interesting because you'd have some attachments that are better at vertical recoil reduction, some that are better at horizontal, and some that have a little bit of both. Yeah, kind of like PUBG or Helldivers, sure. And I've always felt ergo is an incredibly weak stat in this game. People always prioritize recoil because obviously Tarkov recoil is automated. You don't really have to input too much. The gun in the game does essentially like most, if not all of the work for you. But yeah, I think an aiming dead zone where basically like your gun isn't always pointed at the center of your screen. It's not always at the center axis. The muzzle would deviate slightly based on your ergonomics. So if you have a low ergo gun, you're going to have like a big like kind of amount of slop when you aim. And the only time you'll be center point is when you're ADSing. Point firing would be a lot harder. However, if you had a laser, you could use that laser to find your muzzle and obviously land your shots. Whereas if you had a 100 ergo gun, you wouldn't have a dead zone. It would be non-existent. It would basically be what it is right now. So it would be really good for like hip fire, spraying, and that type of gameplay. But yeah, I've always felt ergo is such a moot stat that really doesn't affect enough of the gameplay. And really, the weapon balance in Tarkov, I feel like could be so much better. Like I said, the SBT realism mod, I think, has the best idea in general on what the weapon balance should be, because they have a lot more factors in with the attachments, and they separate the horizontal vertical recoil. They have a new stat as well on the weapons called like balance or something, and like balance affects like a bunch of different stuff about the gun. Came back from Tarkov after 3 year back. Seems like everything has changed. A lot of people have moved on or somewhat soured the game. Not necessarily. I think it's just a lot of the lifers that live in this game that just keep complaining about it. And I used to be that person. That's why I stopped playing this game, is because I realized how jaded I was becoming, and I had to move on to other things and stop viewing the game through rose-tinted glasses, which I still kind of do. But because I've like escaped Tarkov as like a content creator, I don't like require to play this game as like a financial thing. I can, you know, kind of do my own thing and play whatever. It's kind of helped like change my opinion about certain things about the game, and also just more for so just myself, my own like mental clarity. But the problem with a lot of the Tarkov community, in my opinion, is the game has turned into a fucking esport for a lot of these kids. It's all about KD. It's all about how much money you got. It's all about survival rate. Like, if somebody comes up to me and says, I'm like a professional DayZ player, I'd laugh in your fucking face. Like, oh, yeah, I bet you fucking are really good at killing freshies on the shoreline, dude. You bet you're a real pro. And not to say that there isn't, like, DayZ competitive scenes out there with, like, battle royales and tournaments, whatever, for PvP's sake. But, like, bro, it's fucking DayZ. You think I'm going to care that you're, like, a fucking esports player with this game? Like, it's fucking DayZ. Get over yourself. And it's kind of the same thing for Tark. And, like, a lot of this competitive atmosphere kind of came into the game. Like, what's your KD? What's your survival rate? How much money do you have? Blah, blah, blah. Are you a Giga Chad? Do you, like, run to PvP? And blah, blah, blah. And that's what the game kind of came about for a lot of people. It became more of a spectacle type game and less of a game about, like, surviving and extracting and, like, looking for things and, like, trying to live in, like, a very harsh environment that's constantly trying to kill you because everything's kind of hostile towards you in Tarkov. And it became less about that and just more about, like, being an esport, literally, like, trying to turn this game into a fucking esport. And it's just silly as to me that that would be ever something that would happen to a game like this, that people would try and force it to be a competition. Not to say that the game isn't a competition for survival, because obviously you're competing for resources against other players. You're obviously trying not to lose your own gear, etc. But like that whole tournament esport atmosphere, I think is what really soured Tarkov more than anything, because that type of atmosphere from the community is what shifted a lot of the negative change in this game, in my opinion. People turn this game into a sport, a spectacle, not a fucking like hardcore survival game. And it is a survival game. Some people say it's not, but it is. Like this is escape from Tarkov. Like survive, leave Tarkov, get out because it's bad place. You know what I mean? That's quite literally the whole idea of this game. It is a survival game. It's not a survival game like DayZ where you got to manage like hunger, thirst, and water constantly, and you got to worry about purifying water and other bullshit like that, or like when you're going to find your next meal. But it's still a survival game at its core. Yeah, exactly. Clue, it's in the name. Crazy. To extract. It's not W key to fucking wreck Timmy's game, Tarkov or whatever. You know what I'm saying?